With the March election results behind us, we interviewed Justin Krieger, Timberlane Regional School District Superintendent of Schools, to discuss the current state of the district, the school budget, and to clarify the many disputed aspects of the budget. Welcome to this episode of the Atkinson Gazette. I am Michael Boucher. Today I'm speaking with Justin Krieger, Superintendent of Schools for the Timberlane Regional School District. How are you today?
Very well, Michael.
Today I've asked to speak with you because I know the school district is currently facing some difficult times. I have children who are attending in this school district, as do many other parents within this district, and I know they're very concerned with the current state of what's going on with the school budget. Okay. We also have other members within this community who may not be as invested with the school district beyond their tax dollars. And these two opposing sides, they came together last month, they voted, and ultimately we had a lower proposed budget, and it looks like it's going to result in some operational cuts. So I want to talk to you about how we got to this point. Before we do, let's talk a little bit about yourself.
Sure.
How did you become superintendent of the Timberlane Regional School District?
I first started here in Timberlane in July of 2002. I left the Dairy Cooperative School District and came here as the assistant superintendent. I was in that role till about March of that year when there was a transition. I went through some periods of an interim superintendent and then was confirmed in that position by the school board, and I'm eager to continue working here in Timberlane in that position.
Just to give people a little background, you said you were the interim superintendent after becoming the assistant superintendent. Can you explain just a little bit, how it got to that point?
Sure. Yeah, the current superintendent was out on leave for that period of time, and certainly the school district and board needed someone to lead that show, and they had tagged me to do that, and I did that for about a year. Or maybe 9 months or 12 months that way. And then we had some discussions moving forward. So eager to have the role kind of beginning this year as that first reign, and eager to stand in front of the staff at the beginning of the year and kind of set the course.
I know there's different paths that people take to get to this point, superintendent. I'm going to assume that you started out as an educator. Could you explain how you started out in this field?
Sure. So my first year teaching was in 2001. I was hired in the Dairy Cooperative School District from Chicago as a special education teacher. Did that for a year. I taught middle school social studies for a year. I was an English language arts teacher, which was my certification and background for the first time in my fourth year of education. Did that for a year. Then I was asked to be an assistant principal at the middle school level in Dairy. Did that for 8 years. And then I had a really unique opportunity tagged by my superintendent at that time that I created a charter school, a charter high school in Dairy. It was in partnership with the Dairy School District, but an autonomous public charter school. Served high school students 9 to 12. Did that for 4 to 5 years. I then returned to the middle school as a building principal and then made my transition here. So Timberlane is my second kind of educational home after a long stint in the Dairy Cooperative School District.
How would you say that these experiences help prepare you for this role today? And I also want to add to that you just mentioned that you basically kind of ran a high school or a public autonomous charter school, right?
Yes.
Over in Dairy. So that somewhat answers that question, but do you mind elaborating?
Sure. I mean, in terms of like a bedrock for me, it is about pathways for students. I think one of the things that I've seen in education over the 2.5 decades is a large movement of accountability at the outset of that. And now getting balanced with that accountability can be achieved through multiple different avenues and pathways for students. So this idea that schools should be informing opportunities that kids get to pursue their interests and their passions so they can transition into an adult life, I feel really strongly about. I don't think the purpose of school is to be good at school. I think it's the measurement about transitioning to an adult life. And for that way, the more opportunities we can give kids to explore those things in safe, supportive environments and to pick them up when they fail and to chart a course for them when they need some coaching and direction, that's what I believe that is the mission of schools. And I think it's that setting out, and there are great opportunities already existing here in Timberlane to do that before I got here, and we're looking to continue to support and expand those.
As I began this conversation, I was summarizing the current state of the district, and I believe that public education is in trouble at the local, state, and federal level, just based on all the stuff that's happening in the news. And I hope we were able to discuss what's happening at each level, but we're going to focus on the local issue for now. As I mentioned before, the operating budget is now a lower proposed budget. And some people knew right away when they heard that budget that was going to be an issue. And then there's others who believe that that lower proposed budget is plenty of money for the district. You sort of touched upon like what your philosophy is for how your experiences help form, or rather, how your experiences help guide you as your role as superintendent. But I guess on the other side of things, why is it important for people to want to invest in a public school system?
So, the minimum standards are the requirements that local districts are required to kind of put forward and provide for the children of those districts. Anything beyond those minimum standards are going to be values of that local community. Mm-hmm. So there are a great many things that happen here in Timberlane that are not required of the school district or required of the taxpayer. Athletics, musical theater programming, some of the courses involved at the high school level. Mm-hmm. But these are values that Timberlane has because they want to provide these opportunities and experiences for kids. Mm-hmm. So in terms of respect with what we're looking at in terms of operating a school district, yeah, we brought forward a budget through the budget committee that was a reduction from the previous year. The voters at the deliberative session wanted to move that forward and to take a greater piece of that. I'm looking at that as a superintendent as a course correction for the community, mm-hmm. And that we need to now chart a course next year around $81.9 million that we need to operate the district off of. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a course correction. Things are going to feel and look a little bit differently here. But that is also something that is obligated for my charge to be able to move forward to do, because that's what the voters have provided us the appropriations for. So in terms of internal conversations and thinking about how we're going to do that, these have involved like individual conversations with folks whose roles are going to change, mm-hmm. But also groups and teams of conversations that we're going to need to be having them work a little bit more coherently and efficiently together to get the work of the school district done. Because the bottom line is we're going to have about $10 million less to spend next year that we were authorized to spend this year.
I think course correction is probably the correct theme for this whole conversation, right? Because I think for a lot of people, one of the first things that really kind of piqued their interest with the budget is when they learned about the $50 million surplus. And you're saying, obviously from your perspective of the original proposed budget, that the district is now working with roughly about $10 million less. So it sounds very confusing to someone who's not keeping track of all these things that are happening. Can you explain what that $15 million surplus was?
Sure. We had a lot of conversations through the years. I visited the Board of Selectmen and unpacked that surplus for them, and I did that at successive board meetings. But really that number is made up of two different numbers. It is unexpended funds and lines that we had budgeted for that we did not expend fully, mm-hmm. and we're adding that total number, to unexpected revenues that the district takes in. And when you combine that, that's the unassigned fund balance, and what the district decided to do and the board decided to do last year was to return 100% of that to taxpayers. So that money has offset the tax rate that I believe has been already delivered to folks in the towns. Mm-hmm. When we're looking at this year with our operational budget, we're forecasting that we may end in the $7 or $8 million unassigned fund balance area, mm-hmm. Which is certainly a whole lot less than it was last year. But that's the course correction. It's moving back toward what should be a homeostasis of about $2 to $3 million of unassigned fund balance. Mm-hmm. That's healthy to carry. It creates an equilibrium for the district and gives people predictability in their tax rates. Mm-hmm. And that is the challenge for us, is to get back to that level playing field. So we're not going to be seeing these huge swings of a large tax hike, mm-hmm. that the voters approved and put in with the lease and with the improvement in capital facilities, mm-hmm. But also with teacher contracts. And then when that comes to bear, to have a kind of a pendulum swing the other way and have a large tax decrease. We don't want to live at those extremes. We want to live more toward a homeostasis equilibrium.
Do you think it's fair to call those two different funds, the unexpected revenue and the unexpected funds that weren't spent, to call it a surplus?
So, I mean, surplus, a definition to me would be that money is left over. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's a completely accurate description of that term, because if you're including unexpected revenue as we are legally required to in that calculation. That's not money left over. That's money that the district didn't expect to have in the first place. So I think when you're looking at a definition of a surplus, I think it's more appropriate to be talking about the unexpended funds toward the budget as a surplus, but you need to be removing the revenues that are including in the unassigned fund balance total number, because I don't think that matches the definition, at least how I would interpret the definition of a surplus.
You're projecting that there could be potentially $7 to $8 million in the unassigned fund balance for this
Correct.
upcoming year. What can that money be used for? Can it be used for anything? Because it sounds like it was intended to be used and it didn't get used. So
Correct.
What happens?
Yeah, I mean, so the state of New Hampshire is really clear. That's under the board's purview. So the voters have authorized the school district this year to expend the funds that was in the budget number, which I believe was a little north of $90 million. So the school board has the authority to expend those funds. So if there's decisions that they want to make in terms of projects that they want to move on or contracts that they want to be getting into now because it's in the interest of students or potentially for taxpayers saving interest money over the long term, those are decisions that are available for them to take before the end of this fiscal year.
I know you're suggesting that there could be $8 to $7 million of surplus, but do you know what the actual amount is right now?
I can tell you that we're on track for 7 or 8. And it's a tough number because I need to be really clear with folks. It's never really fixed. It's never really static. It is always moving because it is the constant addition of those pieces there. Right. But at the end of this year, as we're looking at the macro things, and you know that, Michael, we're presenting to the board every month now about budget to actual reports. We're looking to come in at about a $79 million expense. That's in the general fund. When we're looking all in, which are the other two funds of the school district, the grant fund and the food service fund that we're required to track, we may be about 82 all in. So that's how we're kind of getting to that broad number. But each month we'll be kind of successively bringing that back to the board. That unassigned fund balance number, even though the fiscal year ends on June 30th, it does not come crystallized until we submit to the state in October of that same year. So there's, even after the end of the fiscal year, there are pieces that happen through the accounting processes that number will continue to shift and change as things are getting paid out and more revenue is coming in. So that number is not static until it's written on the form and submitted in the MS-22 to the state of New Hampshire.
So that's sort of interesting because I think some people had the thought process that once a fiscal period ends, and it restarts in July 1st, right? Yep. That the money the money that the district currently has and not the money that's going to be appropriated kind of just stops there, right? And then you're using the next set of funds that were appropriated. So in this case, you have the $90 million, you're trying to spend that, and now you have the $81 million to work on.
It's a misnomer to have a belief that the school district operates in one fiscal year at a time. Typically, for special education program, we're in 3 fiscal years at a time, and for general programming, we're typically also in 3. We're operating in 2, but we're also planning for a third that is, 15 months out from the beginning of the budget cycle. So again, that number does not become, I think I may have said October, but it's September 1st that it's due to the state. So there's things that happen to that unassigned fund balance after June 30th. Before we're submitting it, because you've got accounts that are running through that need to be reconciled.
Let's kind of go back a few months ago, or a few months ago, when the 2025-2026 school budget was being developed, right?
Okay.
And I'm only kind of harping on this only because a lot of people are trying to understand this.
Yeah.
When the $15 million surplus was considered, and especially the time frame you're telling me now, right? And sorry, I keep calling it a surplus. That's just how the public's calling it.
The unassigned fund balance?
The unassigned fund balance. There we go. So how is that unassigned fund balance being applied to next year's budget? So if you understand my question correctly, we identified $15 million. How is that $15 million incorporated into next year's, or the 2025-2026 budget?
So if by $15 million you're talking the unassigned fund balance from fiscal year 24, that has already been used to offset the tax rate for taxpayers in those towns.
Okay.
if we talk about this fiscal year, when we get to the end of this fiscal year, if that number is going to be about $7 or $8 million, let's kind of talk through that. What will happen is that unassigned fund balance number will come off of the top of the tax assessment for the towns. So if next year we are approved to run the district on $81.9 million, whatever the unassigned fund balance is will be subtracted from that number. And then that is the number that needs to be raised by the towns to support the operations of the school district.
Okay.
And that's including the adequacy payments through that the towns would be receiving for their students. But that is how it's broken down into those pieces. Because if we need 81.9 and we're starting with 7 or 8 as the unassigned fund balance, that is going to come off the top, and that will not need to be appropriated from the tax base because it had already previously been appropriated by the tax base.
Okay, good. So we have a good understanding where the surplus should be. Once the preliminary budget process is over and it's already set, some people in the public were kind of unhappy with the process. Some people felt that they couldn't trust the district after hearing about the surplus. And I know I keep calling it a surplus. I'm just kind of following along with the narrative, right? At the same time, people who are knowledgeable about the budget process, like former school board members or former school budget committee members, they were out in the public providing conflicting information and assuming the role of a trusted source within the community. And also you've clarified what has happened with the surplus. So you can also understand the frustration some people have because they're hearing two different things.
Right.
Once this budget was set, right, did the district administration try to connect with people who were trying to learn about the budget?
Yes, we had many conversations. We had group conversations with community people, Michael, but also individuals that had reached out that we invited in and had one-on-one sessions with them in terms of financial documentation.
There was also public hearings as well?
Yep.
During those public hearings, did the public have a chance to engage and ask questions and have their questions answered?
Through the budget committee?
Through any of the public meetings that existed during this time period between once the budget was set to deliberative.
Yeah, I would really hope that if you asked that question to the folks throughout in the community, that they had unequivocal access. If they had questions or concerns or comments, that whether it was myself or members of my staff, we were always creating forums to be able to, at some points, engage and talk back and forth, and in some other cases, just to listen.
Right.
So I would really hope that we had some expended efforts, that would be the reception or the perspective of the community, is that we were available and we were open and we opened the door and either listened and in some parts engaged, in some pieces agreed, and in some pieces disagreed and provided the evidence about why we were in disagreement.
I would say at the very least, maybe, obviously I can't speak for all the people who were out there who either said they could or could not meet with individuals like yourself, but we know at least now, right, you're providing these regular updates at basically not every, I believe it's once a month.
Second meeting of every board meeting.
Yeah,
yes.
You're providing the updates with the budget, trying to make sure that people understand
Absolutely.
What's going on. Going forward, now everyone's at deliberative. We spent about an hour deliberating. Ultimately, there was the lower proposed budget. When you heard about the rationale for that lower proposed budget, did that make sense to you when they were looking at previous year actuals and saying, well, this is the trend with the actual spend amount, so we just need to add this much to the current actuals plus a little more, which ended up to the 81.9?
Yeah. I think a lot of things can be simple math. I think when I've talked through the kindergarten tuition piece, it's that simple math to me. I think when you're looking at the budget of a school district, a $90 million organization that has more than 900 folks kind of working, touching it, and 3,300 families, it's not simple math. So no, that's not how I would approach school district budgeting, is a very simple addition or subtraction problem. I think it's more complicated and more nuanced than that.
Also, during that same meeting, do you recall hearing individuals say that if the $81.9 million budget were to pass, that there'd be no staffing cuts? And I guess in that moment, did you feel that there was truth to that? when you heard that?
I had my concerns in terms of hearing that, and as we dug deeper into the numbers after we were provided that number and needed to move through the process of actually operationalizing it and making it work, it became very clear and apparent to me early on in that process that this was not going to be possible without staff reductions, without position reductions, and it was our job to be able to have the least amount of impact on the student learning experience as possible.
So obviously, if we fast forward closer to today, we had
Yeah.
the election results where the $81 million passed. It was a very slim majority, so you can say roughly 1 out of 2 voters wanted this particular budget to pass. And as you just mentioned, that as soon as you heard about that $81.9 million budget, even before the election, you already kind of came to the conclusion that this is not going to work. There's going to be operational cuts. But some people didn't necessarily believe that. They heard that there should be no staffing cuts during deliberative. They believed that there should be no staffing cuts during deliberative. And as a result, some people felt that the cuts were almost kind of reciprocal to the results. Like it was done in spite. Like you had to do it because you warned everyone, so now you're making the cuts happen.
Could I be really clear about something?
Sure.
I am not going to make decisions to remove human beings from positions that work with kids out of spite or out of vindictiveness or to prove a point. They're removed from, I made those recommendations to the school board because that's the course correction for the district to move forward in terms of how we're going to operationalize these reductions for folks. But the nomer that this is a vindictive piece or that this is spiteful, it does not sit well with an educator who is here to be providing opportunities for students and who clearly recognizes that the well-being of the staff are the folks that are providing those opportunities for students. So these are decisions about operational efficiencies moving forward. These are not decisions about vindictiveness or revenge.
Well, with that, that said, I mean, when did you have to start preparing for these eventual cuts?
Yep. Immediately after the vote was tallied, right? Like as soon as that happens, there's a course that's set for us in terms of when we have to have a line item budget prepared for the Department of Revenue and Administration, and when I need to continue to work with the school board to approve the recommendations, so we're all on the same page moving forward. So we did those, and I think I kind of mapped out those 3 teams that began to work on those budgetary reductions, both at the board level and all the way down to my admin teams, and successively working through some scenarios and then eventually getting through to make some decisions. I brought that first case to the board on the 20th and kind of previewed them what I envisioned the framework looking like. Then I think that very next meeting in April, when we came back, we had some more specificity and walk them through the actual reductions. And this is about the personnel. And I was able to lead them through the process that we did internally on our end about doing right by the diligence and dignity of those people to have those conversations with them up front.
In your opinion, describing the operational, how those cuts will affect the daily operation and possibly the public education that's being provided.
Sure. To talk about it in levels, if I can, Michael, right?
Sure.
So at the elementary level, there was a reduction in technology teachers. And so these are a push-in model of digital literacy pieces. This is really a kind of a piece in New Hampshire where all educators are involved in that process and doing those things. So I think that in terms of not reducing or not increasing class size at the elementary level with those reductions was a priority for us, and to be able to build an envelope and supportive structure to still be able to deliver that type of curriculum and standards to kids we feel like is manageable on our part. At the middle school level, there were some reductions in some support staff positions that we felt like we've got the internal people to be able to fulfill those types of roles. And then we take another look at some of our service delivery hours for identified students that had decreased over time, and we just didn't have a staffing need to fill that as well. At the high school level, again, it was about class size and making reductions for staffing that was not going to significantly impact that. So when we're looking at hypothetically, maybe a Spanish class that was operating at 12 or 13, and potentially with a reduction in that department, that class is now going to operate on 18 or 19. That's reasonable for us in terms of moving forward and making those decisions, as opposed to decisions that would have eliminated programming for students or eliminated classes for students or pushed class sizes over school district policy.
2 follow-up questions.
Sure.
So one, in terms of the support staff within the middle school, You're saying that you felt that you can get away with not having those particular staff members. Um, is do you feel that in that particular situation that maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe there could have been potential for overstaffing maybe in the past?
Potentially, right? So, one of those these are not positions that work directly with students. They're not student-facing positions, so they're there to support the system itself in terms of really the adult system that's welcoming those students in. So, yeah, I mean, as school districts change and as the responsibilities and our charges change, the makeup of our staff and what we're asking them to do is naturally going to change. So again, I'll continue to go back to that term. Like, this is a course correction here. I don't think the middle school is losing anything by this, aside from the person that was in that position.
Right.
That is something that I think that is meaningful for the kids and the staff. But in terms of the functionality there, I think that we're gonna be able to absorb those pieces at a benefit to the taxpayer and not have a negative impact on the student experience. And I think for me, that's a win on the education side, and it's a win on the taxpayer and community side.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But sort of related to my second question.
Sure.
So you mentioned in the high school you had a specific example with the Spanish teacher, where if you were to remove one Spanish teacher, you can have children still be able to receive Spanish, but in a bigger classroom.
Right.
Is that sort of the trend that you might see for the future, that there be larger class sizes with fewer teachers?
I think it's the trend in terms of having an efficient operation. I don't think schools are organized in a way financially to be able to survive if they're running all their classes off 10 or 11 students. Right? That's not a fiscally sustainable model. So when there's opportunities to make these decisions, and ideally school districts should be doing this through attrition. So when folks are making their individual minds to move on, resign, retire, to transfer over, that's the time to really critically look at jobs. Every time someone leaves here, there should be an examination process of whether that job should be posted or not. And really what we're asking ourselves is, do we need to continue to fill that position? I don't know what was happening prior to when I arrived here. I can tell you now that when a position becomes vacant, there's an internal review with the central office team having conversations about whether we're going to need this position to move forward or not, as opposed to just automatically posting it or assuming that we're going to need it. It's an opportunity to look for a different way to plan for the future.
Could that, I guess, that governing philosophy, if you will, could that then be applied to, let's say, the program offerings with the high school? Let's say, I'll just use carpentry, for example. Let's say you have our carpentry program, but it's not well attended. Would you then say, well, it's not really well attended, so we're going to get rid of carpentry?
I think that could be potentially something. Again, and that's the school district talking about values, right? Like, we know we're not going to be able to provide every single opportunity under the sun, so we're going to need to have a value conversation of what are we going to be able to afford to provide. And if the carpentry program has had a decline of student enrollment, that's going to be a conversation. And then hope the secondary conversation is those kids that still do want carpentry, what are we going to do for them? There's other options for them. There's other avenues that they go. If we're not going to offer it, we'll be part of finding a kind of a solution for them. I think you can apply the same philosophy, Michael, for AP classes.
I was about to ask.
Right, for dual enrollment classes, for classes that are co-taught in some of the philosophies with the competency pieces. Clubs and activities, which clubs and activities we sponsor and provide stipends for. I guess the governing philosophy should be, if there are students who want it and desire it and want to participate in it, then we should at least be having the conversation of providing it.
Some people believe that when it came to these cuts that end up being voted on by the school board, right? They felt that maybe the process could have been done differently, where maybe they should have looked at administrative positions first. And I think probably the logic behind that is administrators typically get paid more. If you're trying to take big chunks out of the budget, you look at the administration staff. Why weren't these positions considered before, like teaching and support positions?
I think to have a statement that they weren't considered is not accurate. Okay, because they were considered. And we did include a district administrator position in the reductions. And I know that you know that as well. Yes. at the special education director level. In terms of minimum requirements, again, Looking at just at the law, we are required to have one administrator for every 500 students. So that would mean that all of our elementary schools could legally operate with one principal, that our middle school could legally operate with one principal and one assistant principal, and our high school could legally operate with one principal and one assistant principal. Just like we don't adhere to the minimum standards as a ceiling for what we're aspiring to, for athletics, for music, for all the other things we do, if I envision that scenario that I just mapped out for you, I am extremely concerned with our ability to be able to keep kids safe, to be able to go through any of the federal requirements that we have, to meet any of the state mandate requirements about student due process, and even for staff due process and leadership and professional development training. So minimally required, we could operate like that. Would I ever want to run a school district like that? Absolutely not. What I really hope that people are starting to think about and learn about is that what those administrators are doing, particularly at the building level. So to say they weren't considered, I can share with the community, was not accurate. We absolutely considered them. We actually engaged in some conversations with individuals about that. And as we look to the future, maybe that's continued course correction down the road. But right now, in this moment, in the time period we had to be able to prepare a line item budget and to move forward, that I could feel secure that our buildings were going to be safe for students and staff, we opted for a district administrative position and not be touching the school administrative positions at this point.
Well, largely not touched them, because there was at least one administrator who got let go.
At the district level.
Yeah, at the district
But I'm
level,
talking at the building level. And there is this separation of administrators in school districts that are district folks, that they are either at the district level or in more than one building. And then you've got people ingrained solely at the building level that are in that building, that culture, that group of kids. And they've got two very different functions. And I'd argue that these folks at the building level, they're more closely student-facing. They're more closely front-facing. They're the ones that are interacting directly with kids, staff, and families.
Just for the sake of conversation, though,
Sure.
Since you've already described kind of the minimum requirements, it sounds like there is technically room to eliminate many of the building administrators.
Let me ask you this question, Michael. Maybe I can give you a homework assignment. Find me a school in New Hampshire that runs on the minimum standards for building administrators. Find me a school.
I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be able to find one, but we're going to go through this thought process anyway. So let's just say we went through the minimum standards, and just like you described, there's no other school district doing this because they know, as you mentioned, there's safety reasons, probably support reasons, etc. But for the sake of conversation, we got rid of these building administrators for the most part, it sounds like. Maybe there could be some district level. What would be the actual sustained cost savings? Are we talking, and you don't even necessarily have to have a final number on that. Like, let's say I have the $80 million budget. Would that be 10%? 1%?
It certainly wouldn't be 10%.
Okay.
So 73.5% of our complete budget is salaries and benefits. That includes all of our administrators. You look at our administrative team, then this is all in. These are building and district folks, I think is around 40. And we're at about 700 full-time kind of employees that way. So if you wanted to do a proportion of that, I think you could get to a percentage. If we're very interested in the number, that's something I could easily generate with a query. But nowhere does it rise to the level of a 10% savings.
Maybe 5%?
Before I give it a number, I'd actually want to crunch the numbers.
Okay. Fair enough. I think that's, I have a number in my mind.
Okay.
And personally, I would say it'd be maybe $1 million, $2 million, which is obviously like 1 or 2%, or less than that. That's not enough to really move the needle, if you will, especially if, and you could probably speak more to this, the annual percentage increase of all the expenses that you have, just in operational costs.
Yeah.
I would think it would kind of be null and void over so many years. That's just the way I look at it, but I mean, there's obviously reasons why it makes more sense to have more administrators, ensure the school system is safe, as opposed to eliminating them, because maybe you eliminate them and then there's expenses elsewhere. I don't know.
Yeah. I tell you what I think about when I hear, and this because this is not a new conversation. I've heard it my entire life in schools.
Hmm.
What I think about and my concern when I hear about the appetite to removing building administrators is what is going to be the impact on the teaching staff. Because what those building administrators do are legal requirements. So at some point, my concern is that that stuff gets passed to teachers. And if we are really attempting to, and I think this is what we're trying to do, is protect the teacher in the classroom so they can teach
Right.
and teach only and not have the plethora of other things that have been thrown onto their backs. That's my concern. Is like that's really going to be the impact of removing administrators. The teacher impact is going to be great, and then what is the result of that impact is the student and in front of that staff member for the day. So when I hear those things, that's what I get. That's what I get concerned about. Who's going to lead the bullying investigation? Who's going to run the IEP meeting? Who's going to investigate the harassment charge here? Who's going to follow up with the DA about requirements for indicators and special education? Like, those are the pieces that I get concerned about. And our teachers already are strapped for time. So if we're really looking to have a rich educational experience, we know the primary impact of that is the quality of the teacher and the time spent with that person. I am very interested in protecting that relationship in space and dynamic.
I think we've talked about the budget and cuts and whatnot for a while, but there is another related issue that happened as a result of the local elections, the results of local elections rather. So there was the fund retention balance,
Yes.
Article 7, that ended up passing narrowly after a recount. There was confusion about that as well, differing opinions about what was going to happen if that were to pass. If we would completely remove the fund retention balance, or would we revert to the 2.5% that was previously voted on, I believe, in 2013. I know there was discussion in the last two board meetings, if I remember correctly, that right now it sounds as though the fund retention balance is gone. Has this situation been concluded? And assuming that it is concluded the way it's being currently interpreted, what would that mean for the school district?
Gotcha. So yes, we've talked about it at the school board meetings a few times. The last report I gave to the board, Michael, is I let them know that at the next board meeting on May 8th, I will bring them declarative information in terms of where they stand on the retained fund balance. I did previously report that we had some guidance that was going to revert back to zero. The more digging in we've done with legal counsel, I am more prospectively hopeful that we're going to get to a point that it's going to revert back to the 2.5% piece, and the district is going to maintain that authority and ability to retain about 2.5% of the total net assessment. I want to work through a couple more legal questions I have, but I'll be bringing some declarative information from the board on May 8th. If it's not the 2.5%, and it does revert back to having the authority to do zero. As I talked about earlier, I think in this interview, we need to get back to a period of equilibrium and homeostasis, and a retained fund balance is precisely there for that factor for school districts. It's one tool that school districts can do to help even things from year to year. So it's a healthy tool. I'd want the school district to have the authority to retain 1% up to a discretion of the voters. I think not allowing school districts to have that tool and eliminating it from them is you're not allowing them to be flexible and make some decisions that in the end could certainly benefit the taxpayer down the road of having a more equilibrium homeostasis matter. So I'd certainly want to be in a district that had the board's ability to do that. I think there's a pathway forward for that one. I want to be able to dot a couple more I's, and then that's what I hope to communicate out officially on May 8th.
Just for further clarification, right? When we're referring to the fund retention balance, we are referring to the unassigned fund balance?
Two very different things.
Oh, okay. So good thing to clarify.
Okay.
And then if the school board is not able to retain, right, what is happening with the money that they could have potentially retained? Is it just going back to taxpayers? Like, what's happening?
So it's a great question. Unassigned fund balance sits over here, right? The retention fund balance is the authority of the board to retain a percentage of the total net assessment. This is the money that taxpayers are providing locally to the school district, including SWEPT, which is listed as a state tax, but is a local tax. That money, if it's at 0%, right, and the board can't retain anything, there's nothing there. If they can retain something and they are choosing not to do anything with that, then it becomes part of the unassigned fund balance and goes back to taxpayers.
You're having the ability to retain some of the funds of the total assessment, right? With, if you will, the purpose to do something for the school is what I was going to say.
Right.
But the way you described it, it sounds like that money is actually being retained to go back to the taxpayers.
Well, if that's not what the board wants to do, right? So if the board has a part of money that they retain 2.5%, they're going to put it to the warrant, and they're going to want to build X at this school, right? And that's voted down. That money then goes back into the unassigned fund balance. We don't have approval to use it, so it's going back to taxpayers. If that warrant is voted yes, then the district has the authority to expend from that retained fund balance account for whatever purpose or project that the voters had approved.
It makes sense for if the board has some sort of priority that they want to work on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Perfect. There was also another warrant article about tax caps.
Yes.
And regardless of how our hours resulted in, it wasn't really going to do anything. It was either going to be a study for a tax cap or nothing at all. And I believe it passed, if I remember correctly.
Yes, we're in the process of setting a study committee.
Okay. Well, let's just, for the sake of conversation, assume that it wasn't a study. It was just for a regular tax cap. Is a tax cap something that you could work with, or rather, a district can work with to actually properly operate a school system, or is it really a challenge and not a way to sufficiently support a school budget?
I think it's a challenge, and I think it's a measurement that's put on school districts that is not necessarily responsive to maybe where that district is at that current point in time, because that is a number or a measure that is most likely arbitrary and is going to be placed on a school district that they'll need to kind of then require. I will share with you that my number one concern about the tax cap is that it's all inclusive, and that includes collective bargaining agreements. So it's not just the operating budget, it's the total district spending. And as I look at where our contracts are right now for teachers and paraprofessionals, and I look at our local communities, I would be very concerned about continuing to extend competitive contracts to those folks to get great people that are working here and still stay within a 2.5% or a 2% tax cap. That I think would be very difficult and very challenging. So long-term macro, that's my concern, is it has a direct impact on the quality of people that we're going to be able to bring into this district or keep in this district. I know the board's actively engaged in setting up their committee. That committee will have membership from the school board. It'll have membership from the budget committee. I'm engaging with the 4 towns to try to get a member from each of those towns to sit on this committee. I'm reaching out to the TTA, the Teachers Association. I think they should have a voice at the table, and also the TSSU to get their organization at the table as well. And there'll be some administrators from my team there. It's be about a member of 12. The school board has talked about it's going to be a pretty quick living committee. It's going to do its work in the summertime and early fall. Then strategically, it needs to report back to the board in early fall in the midst of the budget season, so the budget committee and the school board can consider whatever information will be shared as we're moving through the fiscal 27 budget development.
This question is related to what's happening in the news right now. So you've probably heard that the Federal Department of Education is kind of making different requirements on school districts all around the country in relation to DEI and being compliant with, I guess, not having DEI in their school systems. I don't know if this school district has been affected by any of these executive orders, but is the Timberlane Original School District at risk of, I guess, not being compliant?
To date, we haven't lost any federal funds. I think what you're referring to is there was a certification sent to superintendents to verify that they were, essentially what it was asking us to do is verify that we are in line and in coordination with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. There was some language used in that certification about illegal DEI activities. I can tell you that as the superintendent of Timberlane, I signed that certification. We are certainly in line with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We have not lost any federal funding as a result of any of these pieces. That said, at the state level, there is deep concern, specifically around Title I funds, about those potentially going away. And again, those are funds that allow us to provide extra support for students and potentially staff and families at some of the schools that are targeted that way. IDEA, this is the special education funding. It amounts for about $1 million or a little less than the district receives every year. I'm hearing that that is going to be safe and okay, but there's a lot of uncertainty still, even with that. But as I look at all of the title applications, it's Title I that really is out on the out front and that most superintendents, I think, right now in New Hampshire are concerned about.
You know what? I'm going to leave it right there.
Okay.
I think you've provided a lot of information, a lot of clarification. I'll even admit I learned some things as well, which is always a fantastic thing because you know what? Not every individual knows everything about anything that's going on, but at the very least, we can try to educate and inform ourselves. So
Well said.
that's what I did today.
Awesome. I appreciate you coming, Michael.
I appreciate you having to sit down and speak with me.
Awesome. Thanks.